and Canvas in another configuration, another institution, long before we had courses that existed in a 100% online environment. When I was hired at EKU, I was hired as an undergraduate faculty member for our College of Education, teacher education courses. And I started using Blackboard to supplement what I was doing in a face-to-face setting every day with my students. So I was still having class with them 2 or 3 days a week, and still doing a lot of rich resources. I had PowerPoints and presentations that I used throughout the course. But what I quickly learned is that by throwing up those materials in Blackboard for them in advance of the course actually occurring in that live session, I could front load materials. I could give them pre-tests and ensure a lot of the reading and preparatory work for having class with me took place outside of class. That's sort of what we call in education is flipped instruction before flipping was even possible, meaning that they were doing a lot of the independent heavy lifting outside of class, and then I could use that face-to-face time for the sort of project-based lab style engagement that I really needed to be present for in class. So that was my early years in this, and I began to largely transition more and more of my course online. I was leaving class instantly, and within an hour of finishing class, putting up a lot of more resource materials, things that I wanted them to have after the class ended, along with data to review and all sorts of different things, and podcasts and enrichment materials and things like that. So when I started teaching 100% online, I did have those years of experience under my belt in developing content for an online world and learning how it worked effectively. So a lot of you haven't had that lead time, and so it's made what you're doing right now incredibly stressful as you try to shift courses in under 1 week basically and get them ready for students to return after spring break. And so you may be feeling that nothing you're doing right now is going as wonderful as you would want it to occur. And so one thing that I think I can help you with today is to speed up a bit of your grading. And I don't know if I can cut it by 1/3, but my goal is that everyone today will leave with 1 or 2 tips that they can implement relatively fast in the next few days, and that you'll have other tips that maybe if you're looking to transition your summer courses, you have the lead time to build in before summer occurs, or worst case, before your fall courses transition. And the goal, I would hope, as I believe the IDC's goal would be, is that you forever begin to be richer users of our digital content and resources. And I'm going to have to stop for just a second because my 6-year-old has a question. Yes, ma'am.
The ice cream is melting really fast.
You can get some and then put it back in the freezer.
Okay.
Sorry, we had to negotiate ice cream time. So no photobombing there. So if you don't mind, I'll stop for a minute and see if there are any questions or anything that somebody really has the burning desire to make sure that I cover today before I start screen sharing. Ned, you're going to have to allow me to screen share. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
You should have heard a Zoom I was in with the provost last week where I forgot to mute and asked my daughter if she could bring me a Pop-Tart snack in the middle of the afternoon from the kitchen, and us discussing Pop-Tart flavors. It was quite a little adventure. All right, I think you can see my screen now.
Yes.
On this presentation. Is it looking okay, Nan?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay. So I've strategized how we're going to do this today in a series of what I call tips, which are the overarching ideas. And then hacks is how you can accomplish that tip um, fairly quickly and successfully. And I'll talk about the timeline for implementing each hack as we go along. So my first tip for you is to always try to reduce the number of items that you actually score to allow you to give better feedback to your students. Now, when I first started grading writing pieces as a college professor, I felt like I had to note everything that I saw that was in error on a piece of writing or an essay or a case study that was received. And over time, I realized that I was spending an inordinate amount of time grading things that really were not my learner objectives for those assignments. So here's my hack for this for you. Only grade 1 or 2 proficiencies per assignment. So here's a hypothetical. Professor A, he teaches biology and he's planned a science experiment where students have to submit a lab report. His primary learner objective is for students to understand the scientific method. Therefore, his grading criteria should solely revolve around an understanding of the scientific method in that process. I'm advocating that you ignore spelling and syntax, grammatical errors, formatting errors, MLA, APA, everything that's not critical to the 1 or 2 proficiencies that you care about most this week or in this module of learning. Now, that doesn't mean you ignore them forever, and you can still make generalized comments about these issues. What I tend to do is take notes across the entire spectrum of grading for that assignment. I take bullet points, and then I publish a weekly memo to my students in an announcement after I've graded that. And in that announcement, I note all of the common errors that I saw occurring by more than one student. And that's how I capture that feedback. I do it one time, I do it in an announcement, everybody gets it, and I'm not constantly retyping it to every student in the class. Because if you think about it, how many of your students are going to make the same sort of spelling, syntax, grammatical errors on your reports or your writing pieces for you? And how many times do you repeat the same information? So the goal is to be concise and consistent in how we give feedback. I also don't remove points for those sorts of things when I'm only looking at 2 proficiencies. That might be something I do in a summative assessment later or a culminating project grade, not where I'm doing module assignments. Any questions so far? Tip 2. Finish large batches of repetitive grading tasks more quickly. And I have some ways that you can work on this tip. So here's the first hack. Vary assignment types and formats. So the hypothetical here is that teacher B is doing work to teach teacher candidates assessment practices. And there's a set of standards and competencies that guide that curriculum. She designs assessment tasks that are unique and varied, and students can demonstrate their mastery in multiple ways that are frequently beyond paper and pencil assessments. Not every assignment needs to be a report or a paper, and not every assignment needs to be written in complete sentences. Frequently, bullet points work just as well as complete sentences. By moving beyond what we can consider as very traditional paper, pencil-based assignments, you can significantly reduce your grading load because you can review it faster and more succinctly. You can skim more easily through what students have written without getting buried in the paragraphs and sometimes writing that distracts you because of the other errors. So, certainly if you're working in our English department, you care a lot about syntax and grammar and wordplay and all those things. But for a lot of the departments around campus, not every assignment is about those sorts of issues. And bullet points are a checklist, or even a diagram or some other type of non-formal submission will allow you to evaluate their thinking without getting buried in the writing of it. So a second tip, give students more ownership of their learning and help them become more self-directed. Now, this is a really important one that I focus on, and Esther, who's in this session, has designed courses with me and can speak to this as well. When we build courses together, and we built an award-winning one together, we really focused on giving students a lot of ownership of their own learning. So we made it self-directed. So we begin each module by allowing students to self-assess where they stand in regard to what's going to be covered that week. And we do this with a quiz built into Blackboard that students can take. It self-grades, and I let them take it as many times as they want. There's no limit on it, because by reviewing questions that you miss, you might learn something in the process there. So these sort of self-checks score automatically, but I still have the ability to go in and review the data and see how students are doing. I do these at the end of modules as well, in giving sort of a wrap-up reading or content exam. Largely those self-assess, but I still have the option to build in some open-ended questions within that assessment. So I could have a 10-item quiz in Blackboard where 9 items self-score, and I only have to read one open-end response, give points, perhaps write a written comment, and then quickly move it into the grade book for students, and they get the feedback. So that's the way to speed things up. I encourage you to use assessments in Blackboard. It does take more time to build them on the front end, but you can spend an hour building one, and then all of your students, whether it be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 students, can process through that without you ever having to touch the assessment again, or maybe just touch one question per assessment per module for them. Questions on that? Another idea, a hack, is to have students submit projects or writings or pieces to each other for review. So I'm big about creating checklists and rubrics that I will hand to students in advance of doing the work in my class, so they know exactly what I'm focusing in and what I'm going to score on that assignment. And then I want students to self-evaluate first. Then I like them to trade off with a peer and get feedback from a peer, make those corrections, and that in that way the students are doing some of the heavy lifting for me. They're catching mistakes, they're giving advice, they're commenting on things that I might comment on if I were to do it myself, but by doing it in advance of me scoring it, they save me a lot of time later and allow me to really hone in and focus what I'm doing on the harder pieces of what need to be assessed in the feedback and the commenting. And if you haven't noticed, a trend for me is that I give a lot of comments and I give a lot of very authentic, constructive feedback. I'm not just giving points out in a course and letting students collect points, because that really doesn't build deeper understanding when you're working in a fully online environment. That collaboration, the communication piece is critical to success, and it's one of the things that when you do it well in a course, students respond to and are thankful for the most in a course. Another hack related to this same issue is have students systematically grade their own work. So say you're a physics professor and you have an assessment where you want to talk about force and gravity, and one of the best ways to do that is to give a checklist or a rubric in advance and have the students grade themselves, apply the rubric or their checklist to grading themselves. Generally, they tend to be harsher on themselves than you are. But in doing this and then taking some efforts to edit before they actually submit to you in Blackboard, they've probably eliminated some easy fixes that you won't have to deal with then later. Then again, don't forget I mentioned if they're minor issues, you don't have to note them with each individual student. You can collect that in written notes and then summarize it in a course announcement at the end of the week. I call those my memos, and I do morning memos to preview what's going to go on that week in a course. And then I do Friday wrap-ups. I do what's called a Friday 5, where I note 3 things that went really well that week and a couple of things that I want them to focus in on and think about as they're approaching the next module the following week. Now, tip 4.
Hey, April, sorry to interrupt. We have a question from Aaron. If you want to check the chat box.
Yeah, I'm sharing screen and I can't see it.
Oh, okay. The question from Aaron is, how do you have students provide peer feedback? Is there an avenue within Blackboard, or do they email each other? Do you see their feedback to each other?
So if I'm not so concerned about seeing their individual feedback, they can simply start an email chain with each other, and that works for some assignments. But where I want a much more formalized process, or I might want students to work with different peers, I set up Blackboard groups for that. So the IDC designers can help you do that if you're not familiar with it. But you can run discussion boards for your entire class. You can also set up subgroups of discussion boards where just students that you enroll in that individual group can chat with each other. And generally, I keep those subgroups to 4 or 5 students. Or you could set up just a peer-to-peer, it's more groups, but it would work if you want to stay consistent with just 2 working together. It's a private area where they can chat with each other, but it's a place where you can monitor it and see their feedback to each other. What I really prefer to do is just let them do it on their own, but then when they submit their assignment, I ask them to submit their work for me to review, and then I ask them to also submit the feedback that their peer provided. So their first draft, their second draft, and then the peer feedback. And I usually create a form for peers to use that kind of guides the feedback, or a 2-column checklist where they can check something on one side and then there's a comment box on the other side for them. I love using forms in online because it really hones in what students are saying. It keeps the template consistent, and it allows me to really filter through what I'm receiving from students in a much more systematic way. The analogy there is we used to have students learn to write by doing 5-paragraph essays, and the format of a 5-paragraph essay is very structured, it's very confined, but it's because we're focusing on learning to write something very specific. So if I create a chart or graph or a table or a 2-column chart and ask students just to fill in data, then it's always going to come to me in a fairly consistent and fairly similarly formatted fashion. And that just saves me time in processing it later. So let's see, are there other questions?
We have a question from Leslie Hardman. In those same subgroups, also set up time frames such as Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So this process occurs over time frame for students to reflect and give meaningful feedback. Then by Sunday, they post revisions based on peer feedback. And feel free to use your microphone, guys. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So when they're working on peer feedback, you need to be cognizant of your timeline. If the students have to submit, and I'm just going to give a hypothetical, you can set up your timelines in courses any way you want to. I generally close my courses at 9 a.m. Monday morning. That means if a student has had technical glitches over the weekend, they still have time to phone our IT department on Monday morning and get some quick assistance before an assignment times out. My modules never close, and assignment folders never time out on students. I do that for convenience sake. It means that I don't have to reopen the assignment folder so a student can submit late, and I'm inevitably going to have somebody who is late, and then I'm going to have to go in and do all the clicks to reopen it so that they can open. Now, I work in graduate programs, so my students tend to be pretty conscientious about deadlines, and if they're not, there's usually a legitimate reason, and as long as I'm not impacted in grading too much, I don't care. I don't grade at 9 a.m. on Monday mornings typically, so if they're an hour late or 2 hours late, no harm as far as I'm concerned. But with that in mind, then, if their deadline is to submit by Monday at 9 a.m., then they're going to need peer feedback much earlier in the week so that they have time to do edits. So perhaps if the module opens Monday morning, they need some time to work and then get some feedback. So you might set a deadline for peer feedback of, say, Thursday. That gives them Friday, Saturday, Sunday to make their edits, their notes, manipulate around life events, and then still submit on time. So it's going to be really tight. On assignments where I request peer feedback, it's usually the bigger projects in the course, and I sometimes set a 2-week goal for those, meaning just because I assign it in Module 4 doesn't mean it's due at the end of Module 4. Perhaps it's not due till the end of Module 5, which gives them 2 weeks to work on this extensive project. But by announcing it and previewing it very early, I'm prepping the students for these bigger things that are going to come, and not hiding stuff that's going to sneak up on them there. And it gives them time to coordinate with their partner on that as well. Other questions? All right. And then I'm going to show you one of my courses at the end. So there will be a more walkthrough of one of my courses when I get through with the slides here. But my last tip is probably the most powerful. Use your digital tools to increase your productivity. And Blackboard has a lot built in that you might not be aware of and that you could start using this afternoon to assist you. So automate student feedback through self-grading rubrics. Are you all aware that you can set up rubrics when you create an assignment in Blackboard? And then all you have to do is click the buttons to score it based on the rubric, and it moves into the grade center automatically. It takes a few extra minutes to move your rubrics into your assignment when you set up the assignment in Blackboard, but then it saves you exponentially all that time later because you don't have to continually write notes. You can just use the rubric and score it. And here's the, or if you have the skill, you can set up Google Sheets to do that too, but that might be a little advanced for this session. So this is what it looks like when you open up your scoring feature in Blackboard and you have a rubric built in. You simply click the down blue arrow and it opens up, and then you can click here. And I build a lot of rubrics that if I show the descriptions, and I should have done that and didn't here, it gives you and students a description of what emerging, developing, competent, exemplary might look like. These are the rubric descriptors we use in the College of Education pretty routinely, and we use a 4-point rubric in our college always. So if I expanded this, you would see a paragraph of what this looks like related to this reflective writing piece. And this is a journal entry assignment here for students, and it builds progressively each week. The next one is one of my favorites, and I use this almost every day in Blackboard these days, and students absolutely love it. I was worried at first that students would not like receiving voice feedback as opposed to written comments, but they actually love it, and I've never had a complaint, and it shows up on my student evaluations at the end of term as a highlight from many students. They give positive comments on it. Every semester for me. Voice feedback is very easy to do in Blackboard. It's already integrated, and you can do it quite easily. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. I also voice or video record course announcements for my students and upload them to the course. I was known for, back when we worked from campus, um, going through a lot of papers, grading things, and then leaving at the end of the day and getting in the car to drive somewhere. So I would simply pop on the voice recorder in my phone and record my thoughts to students as I drove over to Model to pick up my daughter or on the way home. And then when I got home later, I would simply upload that MP4 player to Blackboard, and the announcement would be there for students. And again, I didn't have to spend the extra time typing all of my notes up, making sure it was grammatically accurate for students, and then being locked or trapped at my computer while I did that. It allows me to work remotely, and Ned can empathize here, or others that have children and you need to do the car pickup line in the afternoon. And I'm frequently in the parking lot at Alumni at 3 o'clock waiting to edge through the line to pick up my 6-year-old. I've got about 20 minutes there with a great secure Wi-Fi connection. So I work from the car a lot in the afternoons, and that's a great time to record these messages for your students in Blackboard. So, but let's see how you can do it in Blackboard with some screen shares. So, are you familiar with this? This is what it looks like on the right-hand side of your page when you open up a Blackboard assignment to score it. And so the first thing that you have to do is simply click the blue down arrow. And what that does is open up the feedback to learner. This is where I'm guessing you're familiar, you type notes to students, but there's an A button here. And if you press the A icon, you open up a more extensive editing page for student feedback where you can be a little bit more sophisticated, and you'll see all these normal tools here. But this button right here allows you to record your feedback for students. You just push that, and then a new page opens up, and you might have to select your camera or your audio here and make sure it's connected. But once you do that, then a countdown will begin on the page. Once you hit this red button, the countdown begins, ready to record, and it'll count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you're recording. You can capture your message to students. And then when you're finished and you hit save, it automatically populates it right here where you would have typed comment notes. You can still have space down here to add comment notes if you forgot something. If you make a mistake, you sneeze, you get photobombed by a kid while you're recording this, it's fine. Just stop the recording, delete it, and start over. It's a very intuitive, simple process. Then when you're finished and you're happy, put your points in up here, hit submit, and you're finished. And the student receives this feedback in their grade center and can simply open it and play it. And it works seamlessly from their smartphones and devices. Questions about this one?
April, I have a question.
Sure.
It's Angie Spears. Do you feel with the audio feedback or the video feedback? Is there a preference at all in terms of evaluations at the end? Have you experienced what they prefer? And also, do you have like a template that you formulate for the feedback, kind of like what you've been doing for the announcements? Is there a way of, if students are making similar mistakes that you want to share, do you incorporate that in the recording? And do you have any recommendations for that?
Those are good questions, Angie. Thank you. So I'm going to work backwards. So where students are making common mistakes, yes, I will still highlight for them here individually in this recording, because it's very fast for me to do. And my GA that sits in my office has frequently laughed at me because she'll see that I'm recording the same thing 15 or 20 times over and over. But for a student to hear me actually talk to them and say that to them is quite critical in that feedback loop. And as most of you know, when you send students big announcements or long emails, they get lost in the weeds and they don't necessarily process it all. So I will reiterate those common threads or common errors in my announcements in bullet points for them. And I always put it in bullet points, and I try to avoid long chains of text with them on it. So I think what's really critical for them to learn, what can I let fall away and not care about so much this week? Is there something that I know I'll capture next week and I can hit it then? So I'm picking and choosing my battles very specifically. I don't think students care so much about seeing my face as they do about hearing my voice. So I'm not a big fan of showing my image to students all the time. And you'll find, and I'll show you a course in a few minutes where I do a weekly podcast for them. And I've been asked the question why I don't just do that as a Zoom or share it. And I could, but then I'm worried about a lot of other things, like I use scripts, and I'm worried about not making eye contact with the camera without a teleprompter and other things that tend to get distracted with my ability to do a one take recording. So I haven't found students complain about not seeing me, but hearing me makes all the difference. Did I get all those questions, Angie?
Yes, I just gave you a thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, April. And is there a sort of a amount of time do you think that hits that concrete message for students? Like I'm finding with the voice feedback, sometimes I go a little bit too over, and you're right. I think that it's too much information. Is there a specific video amount of time or audio amount of time that we should stick to? Is that 30 seconds and then students kind of drift off with that? Is there a specific spot of time in your experience?
Well, I haven't really read a lot of research on that, but I find that mine tend to be about 90 seconds to 2 minutes max. And that I can say a lot in under 2 minutes, and that's about the attention span of one of my students, because remember, they're trying to process actual feedback and what they need to transfer into action on their part. So, turning it into a 15-minute lecture doesn't really work in this environment. So under 2 minutes is what I always do. And then being very cognizant of the curriculum and what will spiral back around next week, so that I'm not trying to tackle everything, but just the biggest elements of what I care about with my learner goals for that week.
Fantastic. Thank you, April. I appreciate it.
Now, the next one is really wonderful, and that's using screen overlay tools to record your comments too. This is important when you want to screen share. Screen overlay just means screen sharing. I started out using Screencast-O-Matic for this. Some of you may be familiar with that, and it works quite well. But I've since migrated over to Screencastify, which I like a little bit better. It's important to note that Screencastify works in your Chrome browser. It's a download, and once installed on your laptop, it sits as an icon in the upper right hand of your Chrome browser, and you can activate it instantly by simply pressing that icon, and then you're capturing your screen. So I've done a little demo, fingers crossed that it works well on the next slide. So this is an assignment submitted to one of my classes. This is just a journal reflection, and journals are set up in my classes to be very precisely orchestrated. This one had 3 guiding prompts to guide the student through the reflection, but they also have to pull in their readings and work that they've been doing in the course by citing the research in appropriate form and having references. I really want to avoid students just talking from experience. Experience has its place, but reflection should be a balance of research and what they're learning, what the experts say, paired with their personal experiences, if you get my drift on that. So this is a reflection, and this is how I might do a screencastify. Let's see if this is going to work. So once I've downloaded the Screencastify tool to my Chrome browser, and it's important to note that this tool only works in Chrome, it lives in the upper right-hand corner. Then to activate it and begin capturing my content through voice or an added webcam, all I have to do is click this icon, and a screen will pop up, a countdown will begin, and suddenly I'm screen sharing. And this automatically records for me to upload later. So in this example I have on my page, I've opened a student assignment. This happens to be a journal reflection, and I could spend as long as I want to commenting on this assignment without the need to keyboard anything for the students. As soon as I'm finished, I simply stop sharing. It will create a file that I can then insert into the feedback to the learner. If you'll remember, you have a tool here to open a full content editor. And in this, you have choices here that allow you to upload files, YouTube videos, insert your recordings, and insert images and media. And this is the tool that I would use to do that. I'm going to cancel and start. Okay, so I had recorded that for you using Screencastify so you could get a glimpse of it. I think the advantage of screen capture or screen overlay is that when I need to point to something very specifically in a paragraph, or I need to say, look what you wrote right here, I'm not quite happy with how you drafted that. It would be great if this referenced our text reading from page 15. I can just say it and note the spot with my cursor without having to type it all over here and go, this is what I'm referencing and this is it. The only other way to do this, and what we had to do for years, is to open this in a Word document, edit the Word document with comment notes, save it to your laptop, re-upload it right here so that the student got that copy back. So what I've done is I've shortened the time to do this by just doing screen overlay and not having to constantly edit these, what for me is extensive papers when you're talking about a research course, which is part of what I do each week. Questions there?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Stephanie Adams from Social Work. Can students access that recording very easily, and can they do it on their phone and on their tablets as well as getting onto their computer?
Yes. When you Screencastify, you have the ability to download it, and you do have to go through the download step. Screencastify is an external product, so you can't screen overlay and then have it automatically insert in Blackboard like you would if you were just doing the voice commenting. That's a built-in tool for Blackboard and works there. This is a separate file. So you download it to your laptop, and I download it as an MP4 file. And then all I have to do is I pop the file name as the student's name on my desktop. Then I open this, I upload the file. It appears right here, just as it did with those voice recordings here. It's just an MP4 file here instead. You hit submit and the student gets it, and they open the MP4 and they can listen to it. Or if they've got their laptop, they can, they can watch the whole thing and it's there. You can also upload these to a private YouTube. There's a lot of places you can store them, but I don't find the need to do that for just one-on-one feedback with students. And then I just delete the file from my desktop once I'm done with it. I just drag it into the recycling bin so it doesn't clog up my desktop space. Did I answer that?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
I find that anything that I'm able to put in this box is usually pretty seamless for students to open and view. Now, that's not to say they don't have to have their laptop with them, but most of it, whether it's MP4 or these voice recordings, work very easily from their phone. Ned, would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Someone,
April, this is Dennis Field. In looking at that, when you're screen recording, do you have to be careful about emails popping up or anything else on your screen showing up?
well, the way to eliminate that from happening, and I don't think I've had one pop up because I have my Microsoft Outlook closed right now. So you don't get those alerts if you don't have Outlook sitting open in your background area. So
I
that
know, but I usually like to have 3 screens open when I'm doing grading, and I may never know what I've got going on 3
well,
levels deep.
but just as if you were teaching a face-to-face class, you don't want those popping up when you're in the middle of the lecture hall either. So that is one sacrifice you've got to make, is to close out of email for a little while. But I usually just maneuver back and forth. I'll grade for 15, 20 minutes, stop, take a break, check out email, and go back to it and everything.